I had the chance to spend 30 hours with President Trump, over the course of 30 hours with President Trump for a major interview. And it was the kind of thing where, obviously, I'm preparing for it every single day by just keeping up on the news and keeping up on his presidency. Also, I prepared for that. My guess is that interview with President Trump was probably my 45th or 46th interview with him. I first interviewed him probably in 1999 when he was first flirting with running for president. So I'd interviewed him dozens and dozens of times, probably 46 times just between his 2015 run and that point as president. So there was a lot of preparation there and a lot of history there as well. But even with a subject like that, who I knew well, the White House and the presidency is something I cover every single day. When you're preparing for a big interview like that, it takes intense preparation. Reviewing all those past interviews and seeing how he handled the questions. Frankly, in his case, the falsehoods he had told before, so he'd be prepared for that if they came up again, because he tends to repeat himself as well. And, one of the things I've learned is that I don't want to use too inflated an analogy, but like a battle plan for war, you have to have that plan going in, knowing full well from that first question on, you might have to throw it out the window and go with what you're given in that moment. That Oval Office encounter is a perfect example of what I meant by being ready to throw out the battle plan. This was the beginning of the day. The big sit-down, the hour-long sit-down was supposed to be several hours later. This was the beginning of the morning where I was just meeting him as he was coming out of his bedroom, down the elevator, walking to the Oval Office, and he was going to give me a quick tour of the Oval Office, the flags and the desk, and do a bit of a show and tell. But I could tell from the minute he stepped out of the elevator that he was in a bad mood. And he'd actually seen GMA that morning. I wasn't on GMA that morning because I was at the White House, but he had seen GMA that morning, and they had done a story about some bad poll numbers for the president.
I watched your show this morning. I watched Good Morning America, and they had something about the polling, and it's really suppression polling, it's fake polling, but in that case it was just made-up polling.
And he was complaining about that, and I knew this was deeply on his mind because the night before, I had flown back from a campaign stop with him in, I think it was Iowa, where we spent the whole plane ride back on Air Force One, just me and him, and he was eating Starbursts. I remember that. He was eating Starburst candy and watching Fox News. And they were reporting on his poll numbers, which weren't so good at the time. And he considered that very disloyal for Fox News to be reporting on bad poll numbers. So it was clearly on his mind. He was clearly stewing about it. He was cranky about it as we were walking to the Oval Office. And we walk in and his whole staff's there. They were there for this show and tell. It was just supposed to be this light thing. But he couldn't stop complaining. And then he was sort of folding in, complaining about too much coverage of Russia and the Russia interference at the same time.
It's like the witch hunt that goes on. No collusion with Russia. There was no collusion.
And I realized at that moment, I had to do the interview right then. Didn't have my notes, but I had done my preparation. And if he was going to talk, I was going to ask questions. And I was started to basically do what we had prepared for, asking questions about Mueller, asking questions about Russia, pressing him on the poll numbers all through the time. And he kept doing his job. And this is when the key moment happened. He actually went behind the Oval Office desk, the Resolute desk, and started to sign papers. Now, this is where I had the luck of my experience. I was standing over him and that Oval Office desk, the way I'd stood by the side of that desk for many years for Bill Clinton, I was kind of comfortable there, more comfortable than I think a lot of journalists would have been in that moment. And I also knew I had done my preparation. And we ended up having a back and forth about Russia. We thought we were going to be doing this later in the interview, and we believed that it would be newsmaking depending on how he answered it. But I wasn't planning on doing it at that moment.
If Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI? I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening.
And pretty much said yes right then and there. And I kept pressing him on it. I was standing over him at the Oval Office desk, which I think also sets there's another important lesson there. And it's a lesson about body language. He should have never let me question him while I'm standing and he's sitting behind the desk. It's a complete imbalance of power. But in that case, it was working for me. Usually I'm a pretty small guy. It doesn't always work for me. So in that case, it was working for me right there. And we went back and forth and toe to toe. And at that point, he was also getting angry at his chief of staff who had coughed, and he interrupted and started to yell at him as well.
Let's do that over. He's coughing in the middle of my answer.
Yeah, okay.
I don't like that, you know?
Your chief of staff.
If you're going to cough, please leave the room.
And I honestly believed that at the end of that encounter, which was supposed to be a 3-minute walk and talk in the Oval Office, turned into a 25-minute impromptu interview. I thought that was it. I thought we were going to get thrown out of the White House. I thought his staff was going to be terribly upset with what had happened. We knew that what he had just said was major news, saying he would take the dirt again. And so I actually was fine. I said, well, if we get kicked out now, I have what I need. we got important news out of the President of the United States. And it never would have happened in that way had I not prepared. Simply not possible that it would have happened in that way had I not fully immersed myself in that subject and been ready at any moment to throw out the battle plan and go with what you've got in the moment. We joined the president in his brand new presidential limo, the Beast.
What a great group. No, these people, they're so great.
The great thing about the Trump interview is there was so much access in so many ways that most people don't get a chance to have. Now, as a staffer, I had ridden in the presidential limo before, but never as an interviewer. I don't think it had ever been done before. I'm not sure, at least on television. And this was a brand new car, too, which the president was quite proud of. But we got in the car, and we were driving, and we had landed at this campaign stop. And of course, inside that, even though it's a pretty big car, he's a lot bigger than I am, and it was a little uncomfortable. Again, this was just supposed to be kind of a mild chat.
I mean, these people are so incredible. Look, they're crying. They're so cute.
The real interview's coming the next day. He's still leading the polls on the Democratic side. It's tightening up a little bit, and
it's tightening up a lot, which is interesting.
But he's still beating you, according to the polls.
Well, I don't believe those polls.
You know, for better or worse, Donald Trump has no filter. But even your own polls show you're behind right now, don't they?
No, my polls show that I'm winning everywhere.
I don't know. We've all seen these reports that with 15 out of 17 states, you spent $2 million on a poll and you're behind in 15 out of 17 states.
Nobody showed you those polls because those polls don't exist, George. Those polls don't exist.
And we ended up having a full-on interview about his polls and Robert Mueller in the course of an 8-minute car ride. What's your pitch to the swing voter on the fence?
Safety, security, great economy.
Again, doing it with, no notes, no preparation, no extra preparation. I didn't think it was going to be happening at this time. In fact, you could even see after I had sort of pressed him a few times, I kind of said, Mr. President, I know you got to go right now. I don't think that's what he found, but we don't have time for that. Now we'll talk about that later.
That is what he found. Excuse me. He found no collusion, and he didn't find anything having to do with obstruction because they made a ruling based on his findings, and they said no obstruction.
He didn't examine collusion. He laid out evidence of obstruction. Did you read the report?
Yes, I did, and you should read it too.
I read
Come on,
it.
let's go.
And we had to keep on going. But an important lesson for any interview is you have to be ready to seize the moment. And I think that's, that car ride is a good example of that. I was not expecting those moments to happen in the car ride. I was not expecting debate inside the car, but I had to be ready for it because when it comes, you got to grab it.